Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, or felt trapped inside a family that smiled in public but poisoned you in private, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to NarrativeNest. Your support keeps stories like mine alive. I used to think paranoia was a weakness, something fragile people leaned into when life didn't go their way. I was wrong. Sometimes paranoia is just your intuition screaming when no one else will listen. The message came in at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. No name, no number I recognized, just 6 words that made my stomach drop so fast I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. Your MLI is hiring someone. I stared at my phone like it insulted me, and then I laughed. Out loud, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. Because if there was one thing people loved to do, it was stir trouble between a woman and her mother-in-law, and my relationship with Evelyn Cross was already a battlefield. Evelyn was elegance sharpened into a weapon, the kind of woman who wore pearls to breakfast and corrected your grammar with a smile. She had money, land, influence, and a voice that never rose above calm, even when she was cutting you open. From the moment I married her son Daniel, she made it clear I was a temporary inconvenience, not family. But hiring someone? For what? To scare me? To spy on me? It sounded ridiculous, dramatic, like something pulled from a cheap thriller. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I tried again. "This isn't funny." Still nothing. Daniel was already asleep beside me, breathing evenly, one arm flung across the pillow where my shoulder should have been. We'd grown used to sleeping apart even when we shared the same bed. That's what happens when you spend years defending yourself against someone he refuses to see clearly. I turned off my phone and told myself to forget it. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, went through the motions. But the words clung to me. Your MLI is hiring someone. They replayed in my head like a whisper that wouldn't fade. Around midnight, I picked up my phone again. No new messages, no missed calls, just silence. The kind that presses in on you. I thought about Evelyn's estate, the way she conducted business quietly, efficiently, through back channels and closed doors. The way people seemed to disappear from her life without explanation. Old friends, former employees, even family members who crossed her. By 1 a.m., sleep wasn't coming. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel breathe, wondering when I'd started feeling safer alone than beside my own husband. The next day passed in a fog. I took the kids to school, went to work, answered emails, smiled when required. But every spare moment, my mind drifted back to that message. I checked my phone obsessively, half hoping for clarification, half dreading it. Nothing came. That evening, Daniel told me his mother had invited herself over for Sunday dinner. I nodded and said fine, because that's what I always did. Fighting about Evelyn never ended well. Daniel believed loyalty meant silence, and silence was Evelyn's favorite weapon. After he left the room, I opened my phone and searched the number again. Still no name. But this time I noticed something I hadn't before. The area code. It was local, very local, the same small cluster of numbers that covered Evelyn's estate and the surrounding properties. My chest tightened. That's when the fear changed shape. It stopped being abstract and started feeling personal. I didn't plan to go that night. I told myself I'd wait, think it through, maybe even talk to Daniel. But as the sky darkened and the house grew quiet, something pulled at me. A need to know, a need to see with my own eyes instead of wondering. Evelyn's estate sat at the edge of town, surrounded by high hedges and iron gates. Old money privacy, the kind that said you had nothing to hide because no one would dare look. I parked my car down the road and walked the rest of the way, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the leaves. I wore dark clothes, sensible shoes. I felt ridiculous, like a teenager sneaking out, except the fear was heavier, more adult. I crouched near the hedges that lined the back of the property, close enough to see the glow from the garden lights, but far enough to stay hidden. My phone was in my hand, recording on instinct more than intention. At first, there was nothing, just the hum of insects and the distant sound of water from the fountain Evelyn loved to brag about. I almost left, almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Then I heard voices. Evelyn's voice was unmistakable, smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that never wasted words. She was speaking to a man I couldn't see, standing somewhere near the stone bench by the rose garden. This needs to be handled quietly, no mistakes. A deeper voice responded, male, calm, professional. I understand, but I need clarity. This isn't a small matter. My breath caught. This wasn't about me. I knew that instantly. There was no venom in her tone, no personal edge. This was business. I've waited long enough. He's becoming a liability. He. The word echoed in my mind. The man hesitated. And after? There will be no after. Once it's done, the problem ends, the inheritance reverts, the documents are already prepared. Inheritance. My hands started to shake. The man asked something I couldn't fully hear, and Evelyn answered with a sigh that sounded almost bored. Because if he talks, everything unravels. The accident, the forged signatures, the money that never should have moved. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. This wasn't a threat. This was a confession. I leaned forward without thinking. My foot brushed against a loose stone. It rolled, just slightly, but the sound was enough. The voices stopped. "Did you hear that?" the man asked. Silence stretched, heavy, terrifying. Evelyn spoke again, her voice sharper now. "Someone's here." I froze, hard in my throat, my phone still recording as footsteps moved closer to the hedges. And in that moment, crouched in the shadows of a woman I'd spent years fearing, I realized I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I don't remember deciding to move. My body did it for me, instinct louder than thought. I pressed myself deeper into the hedge, thorns biting through my sleeves, the smell of damp earth filling my nose as footsteps crunched closer on the gravel path. My phone was still in my hand, screen dark, recording light a tiny red eye I was terrified would give me away. "Hello?" Evelyn called out, her voice smooth again, almost amused. "Is someone there?" I held my breath so long my chest burned. The man's silhouette appeared between the roses, broad shoulders blocking the light for a moment. He scanned the garden slowly, deliberately, like someone used to being careful, used to looking for witnesses. "It's probably an animal," he said, but there was doubt in his tone. "Probably," Evelyn echoed, "but let's not be careless." They stood there for what felt like forever. I could hear my own pulse roaring in my ears, could feel sweat sliding down my spine despite the cool night air. One wrong move and everything would end right there. I didn't know how, but I knew it would. Finally, Evelyn sighed. "We'll continue another time. I'll be in touch." The man nodded once. "I'll wait for your call." He walked away first, footsteps fading toward the side gate. Evelyn lingered, her heels clicking softly as she paced. I watched her through the leaves, this woman who had made my life small and tense for years, now revealed as something far more dangerous than cruel. When she finally turned toward the house, I stayed frozen long after the lights inside flicked on. I didn't move until my legs began to tremble so badly I thought I might collapse. The walk back to my car felt unreal, like I was floating outside my body. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like someone waiting. I locked myself inside the car and sat there, hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying the recording in my head. I didn't listen to it, not yet. I couldn't. Hearing it again would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. At home, Daniel was awake, sitting on the couch with the television on mute. "Where were you?" he asked, not accusing, just tired. "Out," I said. I couldn't sleep. He nodded like that explained everything, and maybe for him it did. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against it as my knees gave out. I slid to the floor and pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from screaming. That night, I dreamed of hedges closing in around me, thorns growing through my skin, Evelyn's voice whispering my name from everywhere and nowhere at once. The next morning, my phone rang just after dawn. Daniel answered it, his voice groggy. I heard him say my name, sharp and startled, and then he was shaking my shoulder. "It's my mother," he said. "Something's happened." We drove in silence. The sky was pale, the world too normal for what my body already knew. When we arrived at the estate, there were police cars in the driveway, an ambulance, people moving with purpose. Evelyn Cross was dead. They said it was her heart, a sudden failure sometime in the early hours of the morning. No signs of struggle, no evidence of anything suspicious, just an older woman with a history of stress and a heart that finally gave out. Daniel cried, real, broken sobs that tore through him in a way I'd never seen before. I held him because that's what a wife does, even as my mind screamed that this wasn't simple, that nothing about Evelyn was ever simple. I watched the paramedics wheel her out, her face strangely peaceful, and all I could think was, she didn't finish the conversation. The days that followed blurred together, the house filled with flowers and murmurs. People spoke about Evelyn in reverent tones, praising her strength, her generosity, her devotion to family. I nodded and thanked them and felt like I was choking on lies. At night, when Daniel finally slept, I listened to the recording. Her voice came through clearly, the man's too, every word, every implication. The inheritance, the forged signatures, the accident that wasn't an accident at all. I listened again and again until my hands stopped shaking and my fear settled into something colder and heavier. This recording could change everything. It could expose crimes that went back decades. It could clear names and destroy others. It could also paint a target on my back so bright I'd never outrun it. I thought about going to the police. I imagined walking into the station, placing my phone on the desk, telling them everything. I also imagined the questions. Why were you there? Why didn't you come forward immediately? How did you know to record? I imagined the man in the garden hearing about Evelyn's death and wondering who else knew. I imagined Daniel learning the truth about his mother and what it would do to him. On the third day after her death, the anonymous number texted again. "She didn't mean to die," the message read. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, every muscle locked. "Who are you?" I typed. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, "Someone who knows you heard everything." I felt the walls closing in. They knew. Whoever they were, they knew I'd been there. They knew I had the recording. Another message followed. "Be careful what you do with it." I deleted the conversation immediately, even though I knew it didn't matter. The threat had already landed. That evening, Daniel told me his Uncle Robert was coming into town, Evelyn's younger brother, a man who'd been estranged from the family for years after a bitter legal dispute that no one liked to talk about. My heart skipped. The man in the recording, the he Evelyn called a liability. Robert arrived with a lawyer and questions about documents, about accounts, about promises Evelyn had made before she died. I watched him closely, looking for guilt, fear, anything. All I saw was exhaustion and something that looked a lot like relief. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he found me alone in the kitchen. "She was afraid," he said quietly, staring into his coffee. "You know that, don't you?" I swallowed. "Afraid of what?" He said, "Of the truth." His eyes met mine, sharp and searching. "She built her life on a lie. Lies don't age well." I wondered if he knew, if he suspected, if he was fishing. I kept my face still, my voice neutral. "I don't know what you mean." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded like he'd confirmed something for himself. "Be careful," he said softly. "This family eats its own." After he left, I locked myself in the bathroom and listened to the recording again, focusing on the way Evelyn's voice tightened when she talked about him. Liability. If he talks, everything unravels. What if she'd realized she was being exposed? What if the stress, the fear of losing control had finally caught up to her? And what if someone else made sure it did? I started noticing things then. A car parked down the street for too long, a click on the line when I made phone calls, the sense of being watched even inside my own home. The recording wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a ticking clock. I had to decide who to trust, and every option felt like a trap. Fear changes the way you see everything. It sharpens small details and dulls big ones, makes ordinary moments feel staged, like they're waiting to turn on you. I started to live inside that feeling. Every knock at the door made my heart jump. Every unknown number felt like a warning. Daniel noticed, of course. He asked if I was okay, if grief was hitting me harder than I realized. I told him I was just tired, that I needed time. He accepted it because that's what he'd always done, accepted the version of reality that hurt him the least. I didn't sleep much. When I did, I dreamed of Evelyn, sitting at the edge of my bed, her pearl necklace cold against my skin as she leaned in and whispered, "You should have minded your own business." 3 nights after Robert left, I found the envelope. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my car, plain white, no address, no stamp, just my name written in careful block letters. My hands shook as I opened it, right there in the driveway, the early morning air biting at my face. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "We know what you have. We know where your children go to school. Do nothing." I crumpled the paper and pressed it to my chest, fighting the urge to scream. This wasn't vague anymore. This was personal. They weren't just threatening me. They were reminding me how exposed I was. I burned the note in the sink, watching the words curl into black ash. Then I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until my head ached and my eyes burned. That was the moment I knew silence wasn't protection. It was a slow suffocation. The question wasn't whether to act, it was how to survive doing it. I started small. I backed up the recording onto a flash drive and hid it somewhere no one would look, inside the lining of an old winter coat in the back of the closet. Then I emailed a copy to myself from a new account, encrypted and buried under a bland subject line that meant nothing. If something happened to me, the truth wouldn't disappear. The next step was the hardest, telling someone. I couldn't tell Daniel, not yet, not when his grief was still raw and his loyalty to his mother's memory ran deeper than reason. I needed someone outside the family, someone who wouldn't be afraid of the cross name. I thought of Marisol, an old college friend who'd become a journalist, investigative, persistent, the kind of person who didn't let go once she caught a scent. We met at a cafe 2 towns over, far from familiar eyes. I watched her face as I told her everything, my voice barely above a whisper. The message, the bushes, the recording, the threats. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I played her the audio, she closed her eyes. "This is huge," she said finally, "and dangerous." "I know," I said. "I don't know what to do." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing coming to me, but you need to understand, once this moves, it won't stop." That night, as if the universe wanted to prove her right, our house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, no drawers rifled, no electronics taken, just one thing disturbed. The coat in the back of the closet lay on the floor, its lining torn open. The flash drive was gone. I stood there staring at the empty space, my mind roaring. They'd been inside my home. They'd gone straight to it, like they knew exactly where to look. Daniel came running, panic in his eyes. "What happened?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw how little he knew about the world he'd been born into, about the woman who raised him, about the danger that wrapped around our family like a vine. "Someone's watching us," I said. It was the only truth I could safely share. The police took a report. A routine burglary, they said. Probably kids, probably nothing. I nodded and thanked them, and hated how easy it was to lie when fear had trained me. Marisol called the next morning. "We need to move fast before they scare you into disappearing." She told me she'd started digging into Evelyn's financial records, public and private. Patterns were emerging. Shell companies, payments to people who didn't exist, money moving after the so-called accident years ago that had killed Daniel's father. I felt the world tilt. "What accident?" I asked. Marisol was quiet. "Daniel never told you?" My throat closed. "Told me what?" "His father's death," she said gently. "It wasn't as clean as the family claimed." Suddenly, everything made sense. The forged signatures, the inheritance, the fear of someone talking. Evelyn hadn't just been protecting her money, she'd been protecting a secret that could destroy her son. And maybe in her mind, she'd been protecting him from the truth. The next threat came in person. I was leaving the grocery store when a man brushed past me, close enough that I smelled his cologne. He murmured, "You should stop." I turned, but he was already gone, swallowed by the crowd. That night, I finally told Daniel everything. Not the recording, not yet, but enough. The threats, the break-in, the feeling that we were in danger. He listened, his face pale, his hands clenched. "This is insane," he said. "Why would anyone target us?" I thought of his mother's voice in the dark garden. Liability, if he talks. "Because of your family," I said softly. He shook his head, denial thick in his eyes. "My mother wouldn't. She's gone, and whatever she did didn't die with her." Silence stretched between us, heavy and fragile. I didn't know then that the worst betrayal was still ahead of me, that the person who would hurt me the most wasn't a stranger in the shadows, but someone who shared my last name. Trust doesn't break all at once. It cracks in small, almost invisible ways, until one day you realize you're standing on pieces that no longer fit together. After I told Daniel about the threats, he became quieter, watchful. At first, I thought it was fear. Later, I understood it was calculation. He started taking calls outside, locking his phone, asking questions that sounded casual but felt sharp around the edges. Who had I talked to lately? Why was I driving so far out of town? Had I ever gone to his mother's estate alone? I answered carefully. Truth wrapped in omission, because something in me had started to pull back, a survival instinct I couldn't ignore. Marisol called one afternoon, her voice urgent. "I found something," she said. "Evelyn changed her will 3 weeks before she died." My stomach tightened. Changed it how? "She added a contingency clause," Marisol said. "If certain documents surfaced or certain accusations were made, the inheritance would be frozen, tied up in litigation for years." "For who?" I asked, even though I already knew. "For Daniel," she said quietly. Everything goes to charity until the matter is resolved. I felt sick. Evelyn had planned for this. She'd built a dead man's switch into her own estate. Speak up and her son would pay the price. She knew someone would talk, I whispered. Yes, Marisol said, and she made sure it would hurt. That night I watched Daniel pace the living room, his grief sharpened into something restless and angry. I wondered if he'd already found out, if someone had told him what was at stake. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "We should leave town for a while," he said, "just until things calm down." My heart sank. Leaving meant running. It meant silence. And our jobs? The kids' school? "We'll figure it out," he said too quickly. "Safety matters more." I nodded, but inside a cold clarity settled. This wasn't just about safety. It was about control. The proof came 2 days later. I came home early and found Daniel in our bedroom, sitting on the bed with my phone in his hand. My phone. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. He looked up, startled, then defensive. "I was worried," he said. "You've been acting strange. I thought maybe someone was manipulating you." "And that gave you the right to go through my things?" I asked. He stood, gripping the phone. "You're keeping secrets." "So are you," I shot back. Silence fell, thick and dangerous. "What do you know?" I asked softly. His jaw tightened, enough to understand why people are scared. The room seemed to tilt. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely holding, "tell me the truth." He looked away. "My uncle called me," he said finally, "before he left town." My blood ran cold. What did he say? That my mother wasn't who I thought she was, that she'd been covering things up for years, that if the truth came out, it would ruin everything she worked for, everything she left me. "And," I pressed, "and that you were involved somehow," he said, meeting my eyes at last, "that you'd been snooping." The betrayal cut deep and clean. "So you believed him," I said. "I didn't know what to believe," he said, anguish flickering across his face. "But then the break-in happened, the threats, and you won't tell me everything." "Because I'm trying to protect us, all of us." He shook his head. "You're protecting something, or someone." That night I slept on the couch with my purse clutched to my chest, my phone locked with a new code. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next morning, Marisol called again. "I need you to listen carefully," she said. "The man who met Evelyn in the garden, he's not a hired killer." My breath caught. "Then who is he?" "A fixer," she said. "He cleans up legal messes, makes problems disappear with blood when possible. Evelyn wasn't planning a murder. She was planning to frame someone." The world went very still. "Who?" I asked. "Robert," she said. She was setting him up to take the fall if the old case reopened. The old case. Daniel's father. Suddenly the pieces locked together. The forged signatures, the inheritance, the fear of Robert talking. Evelyn hadn't wanted him dead. She'd wanted him ruined. "So why is she dead?" I asked. Marisol exhaled slowly. "That's the question. And I think the answer is closer to you than you realize." I didn't want to understand, but I did. That evening, Daniel told me he'd spoken to a lawyer about the will, about the contingency clause, about what would happen if accusations surfaced. "If nothing comes out," he said carefully, "everything stays intact. And if it does? Years of court, public scrutiny, our kids drag through it." I looked at the man I'd married and saw the impossible position he was in. The son of a woman who'd built her legacy on lies, the beneficiary of silence. "Did you know she was meeting someone that night?" I asked quietly. He stiffened. "What night?" "The night she died. Did you know she was scared?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat. "She called me." My heart pounded. What did she say? That things were getting out of hand, that someone had overheard something they shouldn't have. The room spun. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. His eyes filled with tears. "I told her to calm down, to breathe. I told her she was working herself into a panic over nothing." A panic. A heart already under strain. The truth landed slowly, then all at once. Evelyn hadn't died because of a hitman or poison or violence. She died because the walls she'd built were closing in, because she'd realized she'd been overheard, because fear, finally, had found her. And I had been the trigger. The knowledge crushed me. Guilt and anger and sorrow tangled together until I couldn't breathe. "I have proof," I said hoarsely, "of everything." Daniel's head snapped up. "What proof?" "The conversation," I said. "I recorded it." The color drained from his face. "You need to delete it," he said immediately. "Right now." "No," I said. He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. "Please, you don't understand what this will do." "I understand exactly what it will do. It will tell the truth." His voice broke. "And destroy my mother's name?" I held his gaze, tears spilling over. "She destroyed it herself." The silence between us felt final. That night I packed a bag for the kids and I. I left Daniel standing in the doorway, torn between love and legacy, and drove away without looking back. Behind me, the Cross family empire was beginning to crack, and I was done holding it together with my silence. Leaving didn't feel dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet, aching finality that settled over me as I drove through the dark with my children asleep in the back seat. Their faces were peaceful, unaware of how much of their world was shifting beneath them. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other on my phone, like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. We stayed with my sister for the first few nights. She didn't ask many questions, just made up the guest room and handed me a mug of tea like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. Sometimes family knows before you do. Marisol and I spoke every day. She told me she was ready to publish, but only if I was. She warned me again about the fallout, about the way powerful families close ranks when their foundations are threatened. I told her I was tired of being afraid. The recording lived on my phone like a second heartbeat. I listened to it once more, alone in the dark, the words landing heavier each time. Evelyn's calm certainty, the fixer's caution, the casual way lives were discussed like assets on a balance sheet. There was no mistaking it, no context that softened it. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was intent. I forwarded the file to Marisol with a single line: "If something happens to me, release this." She replied with a promise and a heart emoji that felt heartbreakingly inadequate for the weight we were carrying. The story broke on a Thursday morning. Evelyn Cross's name flooded headlines by noon. By evening, Daniel's face was everywhere too, framed by speculation and old photographs dragged into the light. The Cross Foundation issued statements. Lawyers threatened defamation suits. Former employees came forward with stories they'd buried for years. The family's silence, once so powerful, shattered. Daniel called me that night. His voice was hoarse. "You did this," he said. "I told the truth," I replied. "You ruined us," he said. "My mother's legacy, our children's future." I closed my eyes, pain blooming in my chest. "No," I said quietly, "your mother did this, and our children deserve better than a legacy built on fear." He hung up without another word. The police reopened the old case within days. Daniel's father's death, the forged documents, the financial manipulation. Robert was questioned, then cleared. The weight that lifted from his shoulders was visible even on grainy news footage. The fixer disappeared. No name, no trail, just another ghost in a story full of them. The threats stopped. Either they decided I wasn't worth it anymore, or exposure had clipped their reach. I didn't care which. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Daniel filed for divorce. It hurt more than I expected, even though I'd seen it coming. There's a particular grief in realizing love isn't enough when truth and comfort stand on opposite sides of a line. We shared custody amicably, our conversations polite and hollow. One afternoon, months later, he asked to talk. We met at a park halfway between our new lives. He looked older, tired. The anger had burned out, leaving something like resignation behind. "I read everything," he said. "All of it." I nodded, waiting. "You still don't forgive me," he said. "But I understand now. She wasn't protecting me, she was protecting herself." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." "He knows. That's what makes it worse." We sat in silence, watching our children play, the past and future stretching out on either side of us. Evelyn's estate was sold. The money went where she'd directed it if her secret surfaced, charities she'd never cared about, causes she'd once dismissed. In a way, it felt like the closest thing to justice she'd ever offer. Sometimes I think about that night in the bushes, about the sound of the stone rolling under my foot, about how close I came to turning back, to ignoring the message, to choosing comfort over truth. Evelyn Cross didn't die because someone killed her. She died because fear finally met accountability, because secrets once overheard don't stay buried. I still carry guilt. I don't think that ever fully leaves you, but I also carry something stronger now: clarity. I tell my children that honesty matters, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I teach them that family isn't about protecting names or money, but about protecting people. And when I look back at the woman I was, hiding in the shadows, trembling with a phone in her hand, I want to reach through time and tell her this: you didn't ruin anything. You ended a lie. Life after exposure doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in slowly, like dust after a collapse, coating everything you thought you knew. In the months that followed the story breaking, I learned that telling the truth doesn't end the damage, it just changes its shape. People recognized me in places I never expected. At the pharmacy, at school pickup. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with judgment thinly disguised as curiosity. I heard whispers trail behind me, felt eyes linger a second too long. I became that woman, the one who brought down a powerful family, the one who recorded her own mother-in-law. At first, I wanted to hide. Then I realized I'd done enough of that for a lifetime. The hardest part wasn't the public attention. It was the quiet moments, the nights when the house was finally still, the kids asleep, and my mind wandered back to Evelyn, to the way she'd sit at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes sharp, to the subtle humiliations I'd swallowed for years because I thought peace was worth the cost. I wondered if she'd ever loved Daniel in a way that wasn't tangled up with control. I wondered if, in her last moments, she thought of him or of me. The investigation dragged on. There were hearings and reports and carefully worded conclusions. No one was charged with her death. Officially, it remained a heart attack, but the narrative around it had changed. Stress-induced, fear-related, a woman collapsing under the weight of her own secrets. Sometimes that felt like mercy, other times like a failure. Marisol and I met often, usually walking along the river where conversations felt less heavy when they moved alongside water. She told me the story had sparked others. People from similar families reached out. Women especially, daughters-in-law, sons, employees, all carrying versions of the same silence. "You started something," she told me once. "I just told what I heard," I replied. "That's how it always starts," she said. Daniel kept his distance, but we learned how to coexist for the kids. Our exchanges were civil, sometimes even warm, but there was a wall between us neither of us tried to climb anymore. Love had turned into something quieter. Respect, maybe, or resignation. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes from the garage, I found a photo album I'd forgotten about. Early days, our wedding, holidays at the estate. There was Evelyn, smiling for the camera, her hand resting possessively on Daniel's arm. There I was, too, younger, hopeful, unaware of the role I'd been cast into. I closed the album and donated it the next day. Some histories don't need preserving. The anonymous messages never returned. I don't know if the person behind them decided the risk was gone or if exposure had forced them underground. Either way, the silence felt different now, less threatening, more like an ending than a pause. Robert sent me a letter, a real one, handwritten, careful. He thanked me for clearing his name, for giving him a chance to live without suspicion hanging over him. He admitted he'd known pieces of the truth for years but never had proof. Fear, he wrote, is a powerful jailer. I understood that better than ever. The children adjusted faster than I did. They always do. New routines, new house, a different kind of normal. Sometimes they asked about their grandmother. I told them she was complicated, that she loved them in the only way she knew, that sometimes adults make choices that hurt others because they're afraid. One night, my daughter asked, "Did you do the right thing?" I looked at her small face, so open and searching, and felt the weight of the question settle into my bones. "Yes," I said, even though it hurt. She nodded like that made sense and went back to sleep. I stayed awake long after, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how often we teach children to be brave without showing them what bravery actually costs. A year passed, then another. The cross name faded from headlines, lingering only in legal textbooks and cautionary articles about unchecked power. Daniel rebuilt his life quietly. I rebuilt mine deliberately. I started volunteering at a local support group for women leaving controlling families. I didn't tell my story unless someone asked. When I did, I kept it simple. Fear thrives on complexity. Truth doesn't need it. Every now and then, I drive past the old estate. The hedges trimmed lower now, the gates repainted. New owners, new secrets, probably. I wondered if the rose garden still smelled the same at night. On the anniversary of Evelyn's death, I went there once, just parked across the street and sat in my car. I didn't feel triumph or guilt, just a strange, quiet sadness for all the damage that could have been avoided if honesty had arrived sooner. As I turned the key to leave, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. For a split second, fear flared, old instincts waking up. I considered ignoring it, then I answered. "You don't know me," a woman's voice said, calm, measured. "But I wanted to thank you." "For what?" I asked carefully. "For proving that silence isn't the same as loyalty," she said. "Some of us needed to hear that." The line deadened. I sat there for a long moment, the engine humming softly, and felt something loosen inside me, a final knot, maybe, the last echo of that night in the bushes. My life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was honest, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Still, there was one truth I hadn't fully faced yet, one realization that waited quietly at the edges of everything I'd survived. The recording hadn't just ended Evelyn's life as she knew it, it had saved someone else's. And in part 7, I would finally understand whose life that was and why the anonymous warning had been sent to me in the first place. Before I begin, I need to say this. Everything you think you know about loyalty and family can be twisted into something dangerous, and sometimes the ones you fear the most are the ones you think you know best. The months after the story broke were strange, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. I thought I had survived the worst, but in truth, I hadn't yet understood the full consequences of that night in the bushes, the night I captured a conversation that didn't just reveal secrets, it reshaped lives. Marisol called me one rainy afternoon, urgency in her voice. "You need to hear this before anyone else does," she said. My heart sank. I knew her tone too well. It wasn't panic, it was revelation. She explained that she had traced the anonymous messages and a trail of digital breadcrumbs. They didn't originate from a random stranger, not from Evelyn, not from the so-called fixer. They had come from someone within the Cross family itself, someone who had known that the recording existed and that it could expose the truth, someone who had feared what Evelyn's plan would do to their life. "Who?" I whispered. "Daniel," she said. The words hit me like a fist. I sat down hard, rain pounding against the window beside me. Daniel, my husband, my partner, had been watching me, monitoring the messages, making sure I didn't step too close to the truth. At first, I felt betrayed, but then something colder settled in. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was fear, pure, protective fear. Marisol continued. He didn't know how to stop Evelyn without destroying her or us, so he warned you indirectly. He couldn't tell you directly because if Evelyn suspected, it could have made her panic. And now it's clear why everything escalated the way it did. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he explained every choice, but I couldn't. He had done what he thought was necessary. He had tried to contain a storm I had stumbled into unknowingly. That night, I confronted Daniel. He didn't deny it. He sat at the kitchen table, exhausted, eyes rimmed red from nights of worry I hadn't known he endured. "I had to," he said softly. "I didn't know how else to keep you safe, to keep the kids safe. I thought if you knew too much, it would make things worse. I never thought she would die." I sat across from him, staring at the man I had married, realizing that love is often tangled in fear. "You didn't know she would die," I said, "but I did. I didn't want her to, but I was there, and I know it was my presence, my recording that escalated everything." He shook his head. No, it was her own choices. She built her empire on secrets and lies. You didn't create that. You just revealed it. I wanted to believe him. I tried. And slowly the weight of guilt began to shift. It wasn't mine alone to carry. Evelyn had made her decisions, and in doing so, she had left a chain reaction I couldn't control. The truth that the recording revealed was staggering. Evelyn had planned to frame Robert for something he hadn't done, to manipulate the inheritance to her advantage. But in the shadows of her own fear, she triggered events she couldn't undo. My recording, the very act I had feared would destroy everything, had also preserved evidence that proved Robert's innocence and prevented a false conviction. I realized then that my actions had saved someone's life, not just legally, but morally. Without that recording, an innocent man could have been destroyed. Evelyn's death was tragic, but it had prevented further tragedy. As Daniel and I sat together, the first honest conversation in months, I felt a tentative understanding return. We had both been trapped by fear and secrecy, but now, for the first time, we could see clearly. I thought about the message I had received that night. "Your MLA is hiring someone." I had assumed it was a threat, a warning, perhaps even a prank. But now I understood. It had been protection, not from Evelyn, but for me, for the children, for the truth. And the moral, as it finally became clear, was this: Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that preserve life, even when it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes courage isn't just about confronting evil, it's about choosing the truth, even when it terrifies you. The children were safe. Daniel and I were navigating our fractured marriage carefully. Marisol's story had been published, revealing Evelyn's schemes and clearing Robert's name. The Cross Empire would never recover its former glory, but that wasn't the point. The point was that lives had been spared and lies had been exposed. I kept the recording, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. That night in the bushes had changed everything. It had forced me to confront fear, betrayal, and moral responsibility. It had taught me that truth carries weight, sometimes unbearably so, but it also carries life. As I tucked my children into bed that night, I whispered to myself the words I wished I had heard when I first hid in those hedges. Courage is often quiet, and its consequences, though heavy, can save more than you know. The recording had ended Evelyn's life, but in the end it had also preserved justice. It had reshaped our family, but not destroyed it, and it had shown me, painfully and clearly, that the line between right and wrong is rarely straight, but walking it, even alone, is always worth it. I sat by the window long after the children slept, the night still and quiet. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. I felt accountable. I felt alive, and I finally understood the truth about fear, power, and love. Sometimes facing what terrifies you most is the only way to truly protect the ones you care about. This story isn't about revenge or drama or the sensational headlines. It's about choices, about responsibility, about how one hidden conversation can ripple through lives, ending some stories, saving others, and leaving those who witness it forever changed. The night I hid in the bushes, I thought I had simply uncovered a secret. I had no idea that secret would also teach me the meaning of courage, the weight of truth, and the delicate balance between justice and survival. Because sometimes what we fear the most is also what saves us. Before I begin, I want to say this clearly. The story ends here, but the lesson lasts. The night in the bushes, the recording, the lies, the fear, they all came together to teach something I will carry for the rest of my life. And it isn't about revenge, it's about truth, courage, and the cost of silence. In the weeks after my confrontation with Daniel, our lives settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. We moved to a smaller house, farther from the Cross estate, and I started volunteering at a local community center, sharing my experiences in subtle ways with women trapped in manipulative families. Telling my story became therapy, and in it I discovered that truth has a strange, quiet power. Daniel and I co-parented the children with cautious tenderness. He wasn't the man I once married, but he was learning, slowly, how to navigate the truth without fear controlling every move. And I was learning how to live with the consequences of courage without letting guilt destroy me. I still think about Evelyn often, about her grace, her cruelty, her brilliance, and her obsession with control. I think about the way she carried fear like armor, and how that fear ultimately became her undoing. But I also think about the truth my recording revealed, and how it protected someone she had planned to destroy. Robert was safe, and justice, though delayed, had prevailed. One evening, Marisol visited me. She brought coffee and her usual calm presence, the kind that grounds you when the world feels unstable. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill, sipping slowly as she glanced at me. "You look lighter," she said. I nodded. "I feel lighter. It doesn't erase what happened, but it makes it bearable. It makes it meaningful." She smiled. That's the power of truth. You held it when others were blinded by fear. You survived because you chose to act, not to hide. Most people can't do that. I thought about the bushes, about the moment the stone rolled beneath my foot and I realized I was seen, about the surge of panic, the thrill of fear, the cold clarity that followed. That night had been the hinge on which so much of our lives turned, and I realized that courage often arrives in small, terrifying doses. One decision, one breath, one choice to record, to witness, to act. I looked out at the street, quiet now, and imagined Evelyn's garden bathed in moonlight, roses still blooming in defiance of everything that had passed. For a long time, I blamed myself for her death, for triggering fear that broke her heart, but the truth was more complicated. She had created a world where fear ruled. I merely stepped into it, and in doing so, I turned her power into accountability. Sometimes I replay snippets of the recording, not to relive the horror, but to remind myself why I cannot ever take silence lightly. Those voices, her calm, the man's methodical tone, hold lessons. They remind me that every choice carries weight, that the truth is fragile and sometimes terrifying, but necessary. The children are thriving. They ask questions about family, about fairness, about right and wrong. I answer as honestly as I can. I tell them that people make mistakes, that sometimes adults fail, and that courage is not about never being afraid. It's about acting even when fear grips you. I tell them about Evelyn sparingly, carefully, emphasizing lessons rather than pain. Daniel and I have rebuilt a tenuous respect, not love, at least not as it was, but understanding, and I have rebuilt myself. My life is quieter now, yes, but it's real, safe, honest. Sometimes, late at night, I revisit the bushes in my mind. I remember the sound of footsteps, the hush of the night, the way my heart pounded against my ribs as I realized I was about to uncover something monstrous. I remember the fear, yes, but I also remember clarity, the realization that even in the darkest moments, a single choice to act, to speak, to witness can ripple across lives in ways you cannot imagine. The moral of this story is simple. Fear is powerful, silence is easy, but courage, the quiet, trembling courage to confront truth, is what shapes the world. Evelyn's life ended because of fear, yes, but others were spared because of action. I survived because I chose truth over comfort, and in the aftermath, I learned that the consequences of courage are not always immediate, but they are enduring. I do not tell this story to frighten. I tell it to illuminate, to show that within every hidden conversation, every whispered secret, there is the potential to shape life and death, to choose action over passivity, to recognize that power can destroy, but truth preserves. I look at my children and I see the legacy I hope to leave them: honesty, bravery, and the ability to face fear without being consumed by it. I look at Daniel and I see a man learning slowly that legacy built on secrecy is fragile and that accountability, however painful, is stronger. And I look back at myself, the woman who crouched in the bushes, trembling with a phone in her hand, and I realize that courage doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in tiny, shivering breaths, in decisions made under pressure, when the world is silent except for your heartbeat. It comes when you choose to see, to hear, and to act even when every instinct tells you to run. The night I hid in the bushes, I didn't know I was witnessing the end of one life and the preservation of another. I didn't know that truth would demand such a heavy toll, or that fear could be both weapon and guide. But I do know this: that night, that recording, that choice changed everything.
And in the end, that is the story I carry forward. Not revenge, not regret, not shame, but clarity, courage, and the knowledge that even in the darkest, most tangled family secrets, there is always the possibility for truth to shine and for life to be saved because of it. Because sometimes the things we fear the most are the very things that make us alive, and sometimes the truth, when we finally hold it, is the only thing that can set everything right.